Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
This is our custom. Let's go around and say our names. We can start with you in the background. So
George, Ray, Rule, Rick, Jim,
Tom,
Robert,
Steve,
Jim,
Randy, Jason, Peter,
Clint, Larry, Jack,
Patrick,
Larry,
Lee, Howard,
David,
Harley,
Marvin,
Arthur, Daniel,
Peter, Brian,
Tom, Carl, Joe,
Andre, Justin,
Dean.
Andrea.
And Andrea is so kindly coming at reasonably short notice to stand in for her good friend and colleague Gil Fronsdal. And Andrea has been practicing insight meditation since '96 and began teaching classes in 2003. She's particularly drawn to intensive retreat practice and has done a number of long retreats both here and in Burma. During one long sitting practice period in Burma, she ordained as a nun with
Sayadaw U Janaka.
Thank you. And she's inspired by the service aspect of practice at the Chaswa Monastery in Burma and is in the teacher's training program at Spirit Rock, Jack Kornfield. And last week we started our little mini-series on anger with Dave Rico, and Andrea is going to kindly take us through the door of aversion.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I hope, can you all hear me? I have a little bit of a sore throat and a cold, so I hope I can speak up enough. When Dean told me that the topic was anger, I thought, oh great, this is one of my favorite subjects. I have a lot of experience with aversion and anger and have worked with it extensively in my practice and have found it a lot of opening and freedom through this practice of exploring aversion and anger. So I always love to share what I've learned along this topic. So anger is a form of aversion. Aversion takes many different forms, but basically it's a form of reactivity to things that are unpleasant. So, for instance, when we meet something that's unpleasant, we typically don't like it and want to get rid of it in some way, either by taking ourselves out of the situation or by pushing the thing away from us. And the two main movements I've found in aversion are basically either fear, to take ourselves away, this feeling of wanting to get out of here, or anger, the wanting to lash out at what we don't like in our environment. There's many, many different flavors of aversion: frustration, hostility, dread, anger, rage, irritation. There's so many different levels of this movement of mind to want to push away something unpleasant. But in most of my examples today, I will focus on anger. At one point, the Buddha was talking to his monks, and he said that someone who is enlightened, who has experienced awakening, experiences unpleasant experience. And someone who is not awakened, who is, they call it a run-of-the-mill worldling, experiences unpleasant sensation. And the Buddha asked his monks, what is the difference between these two? And they responded, well, please tell us, and we will remember it as you have instructed us. So he said, when a run-of-the-mill worldling experiences unpleasant sensation, and I'm paraphrasing here, they beat their breast and moan and wail and suffer greatly, saying, woe is me, why me? He said it was as if a man being struck by a dart then struck himself with another dart. So adding to the first unpleasant sensation a second unpleasant experience. And actually we do more than add a single second arrow. We typically add a third and a fourth and a fifth. We don't like for instance, if you cut yourself with a knife, there's the physical unpleasant experience of being cut. But then there can also be some reactivity like, how could I have been so stupid to have not seen where the knife was going to go if it slipped? And then we get angry with ourselves because we called ourselves stupid. And then we get sad because because we were angry with ourselves. And then we feel frustrated because we've seen this pile of reactivity. And we just pile it one on top of the other. So the Buddha continued with his monks and said, when an enlightened person experiences unpleasant sensation, he experiences unpleasant sensation. It stops there. So really the story of aversion is the story of reactivity to unpleasant experience. It begins there. It begins with this unpleasant experience. Now we can actually witness this in our practice. We can see that our reactivity is born out of unpleasant and mushrooms in this way. We can begin to see where our reactivity begins. But often in our practice, we don't see that. What we see instead is a full-blown rage. We wake up, we become aware that we are enraged. And we need to learn how to practice with that as well. I think that aversion, it's a very natural experience, actually. It is a form of reactivity, but it's a very natural thing. So I want to just encourage you to think of it as a kind of a normal thing in the mind. It's not really something to think of as a bad thing necessarily. It serves a function for us. And I think it actually probably has roots in biological experience. So even an amoeba, for instance, Gil likes to use this example a lot. An amoeba in a noxious environment will pull away from the noxious aspect of it. And an amoeba will move towards food. So there's a kind of a natural response to move away from unpleasant and towards pleasant. So it's kind of a natural thing. But in our brains, we seem to have taken this to an incredible extreme and react to things that are not necessary to react to. It's kind of an optional reactivity, but it can be born out of some very deep experience from childhood, for instance. This kind of reactivity that we learn in childhood that we need to protect ourselves in some way. And it was functional at that point in our lives. And then as we get to be adults, it's like that pattern has become habituated. It becomes a groove in our mind. It's a way that we have learned to respond in a specific situation, and yet it's probably no longer so necessary. So this is the kind of reactivity that we can learn how to unwind through our meditation practice. I think that aversion and anger particularly can serve as a signal for us, as it's something that needs to be paid attention to. Something is going on that needs to be attended to. But our typical way of attending to things that we get angry about or aversive to is to focus on the thing in the world. When we experience anger, we typically are focused on the thing we're angry at, the person we're angry at. We're really focused out this way. And when I speak of anger being a signal that something needs to be paid attention to, I'm not speaking about looking out there to pay attention to what's out there that we need to fix. Because that's typically the way we respond. We need to fix something, either by taking ourselves out of the situation or by doing something to our environment to change it, or to try to change another person. What I'm suggesting in this anger needs to be paid attention to is, instead of focusing outwards on what we're angry at, to turn the attention back on what is the experience of anger itself. What does it feel like to be a human being that is angry? That shift is a huge shift for us, and it is the movement of mindfulness. It's the movement of our practice to turn our attention towards what the actual experience of anger is. When I did this early in my practice, anger was actually the doorway through which I entered practice in the first place. It was an out-of-control experience for me. I knew I needed to do something. I was basically non-functional at times because the anger got so strong. And I could see that the anger was overwhelming. And I was pretty focused on the person that I was angry at. And I could see, actually, as I began to do this awareness, mindfulness of the anger, I could see that there was a belief that somehow the anger that I was experiencing would harm the person that I was angry with. That it would teach them a lesson, teach him a lesson. It would somehow get out there and do something to the person I was angry with. Now, my circumstances at the time were that I was in the Peace Corps on a little tiny island in the South Pacific, about 7,000 miles away from California, where the person that I was angry with was living. So it became kind of clear that, that anger was not going to travel those 7,000 miles, but it was eating me up. So there's a story that the Buddha tells about anger. He says, anger is like picking up a hot coal to throw at somebody. And we have that belief that we're going to hurt them by throwing this hot coal at them, but we burn ourselves in the process. And I was experiencing that in spades. So turning our attention to the anger, how do we do that? Practicing with aversion. One of the most effective ways that I found in working with aversion and anger is to turn the attention to the physical experience in the body. What's going on in the body? There's so many different experiences that we can have when we're angry. The body can get tight, hot, churning. There can be pressure, a feeling of pressure, of tension in the body, maybe a clenching in the jaw. There's a lot of physical experiences that we can have when we're angry. The point, or one of the reasons it's skillful to turn our attention to our body when we're angry, is because so much of the anger is fed by the thoughts around the anger. He did this, she did that, they shouldn't have done this, Why did they do that? I'm going to do this to them because they did that. I would have done it better. All of those thoughts, they actually feed the anger and make it stronger. So turning our attention to the body does a couple of things. First, it keeps us in the present moment. It keeps us experiencing what's happening here and now. It's not repressing what we're experiencing. It's not turning away from what we're experiencing. It's not saying, I'm not going to experience this anger. It's allowing the anger to be there, experiencing it, but it's not engaging in the content or the story around the anger. So it doesn't feed the anger to pay attention in this way. Mindfulness is a beautiful tool for us. It has this capacity or this quality that when we pay attention to unskillful states of mind, anger, hostility, irritation, it creates the conditions for it to appear less frequently in our lives. Now this kind of seems a little counterintuitive, at least it did to me when I first started paying attention. I thought, if I pay attention to anger, it's just going to get worse. It's going to get stronger. But that's not the case. If you pay attention to the thoughts around the anger and think about the anger, think the thoughts around the anger, it does get worse. But simply paying attention to the physical experience in a non-judgmental, non-reactive way actually allows the experience of anger to flow through us. It allows that to live its life. All emotions have a life. They have an arising and a passing. They're kind of like a wave. Emotions kind of are like a wave. And if we bring a mindful attention to our emotions, it allows them to live their life in a natural way, to come into being, to crest, and then to flow out. So this mindful awareness to the body allows the emotions to manifest in this way in our experience, to appear, feel the fullness, the fruition of it, and then to flow out. In this early experience of anger that I described when I was first paying attention to the anger, it was pretty clear that the bodily experience of anger, at least where I was experiencing it at that point, was really unpleasant, physically unpleasant. But later in my practice, and I wondered, there seemed to be this movement or this desire to be angry. I could see that kind of movement or that pull to be angry, and I thought, why is the mind doing that when it's such an unpleasant experience? On one retreat, it was a 2-week retreat, and something happened fairly early into the retreat that made me angry. And it kept coming back to me over and over again. So I got to pay attention to anger in a very detailed, specific way on that retreat. Got to pay attention to the thought that would trigger the manifestation of anger and see the whole thing come into being. And one time, I saw the thought, and in the next moment I felt just the beginnings of this movement towards a kind of a feeling of self-righteousness. And that felt warm and full. And it was very pleasant. And very quickly it moved into hot and pressure and very unpleasant. But I thought, oh my gosh, that was like the hook. That split second of pleasant sensation might be part of the reason why we go there. There's that feeling of just being so alive and present and in power, imbued with the sense of being in a split second before it turned into that full-blown anger. So that was very interesting to me in the observation of anger. Because the physical experience, well, also the mental experience of anger. They're both unpleasant. It can be difficult to turn our attention to sometimes. It can be a challenge to stay in that space of unpleasant experience. But when we start to do this in a non-reactive way, when we bring our mindful attention to anger in a non-reactive way, we do begin to see this quality that the mindfulness has to kind of lubricate the anger and to allow it to flow in a way that we can see causes us less suffering than if we were engaged in the anger. So we start to see that bringing mindful awareness to our anger actually is less suffering than it is when we are caught up in the anger. It's really helpful in paying attention to anger and to aversion. And as you pay attention to anger, you'll probably start to see the subtler forms of it. Just the pushing away, the resistance, the not liking the experience, the aversive side of it. It's really helpful to simply recognize it in our experience. Just to recognize aversion is happening, anger is happening. That simple recognition is very, very powerful. This is, and what I'm talking about here, much of what I'm talking about can be practiced on the cushion, but also in our daily lives. In fact, the majority of my work with anger has been in my daily life and not so much on the cushion. In fact, when I first started this, the meditation practice, and I was dealing with so much anger, I realized that the meditation was a place that I could take refuge from the anger. I had a little bit of a capacity for some concentration practice, and I could take a break from the anger on the sitting cushion. So I didn't try to explore it too much in the meditation itself. But in my daily life, it was running rampant. So I really dedicated my mindfulness practice in my daily life to observing anger in my daily life. So this can be a major work in our daily lives as well. And this recognition tool, the tool of recognizing this is anger, is very powerful. I'll tell you a story about how it functioned for me in those early months of my practice. I didn't have much training at that point. I was in the South Pacific, and there were a couple of books on meditation, but most of them were not very accessible. But a friend sent me a book called Everyday Zen by Joko Beck. And in that book, she talked about picking some projects to be mindful of in your daily life. And I wasn't particularly inclined to sitting meditation practice at that point in the first few months of my meditation, of my mindfulness practice. But I liked this idea of bringing mindfulness to my daily life, and in particular to the anger, because that was what was out of control. So I chose the anger as a project, something to bring my mindfulness to, as Joko Beck had suggested. And so I said to myself, okay, whenever I get angry, I will pay attention to it. And what I discovered as I did this was that initially I wouldn't remember to pay attention. And anger is such that, or at least my anger at that point was such that, it didn't tend to just go away. It tended to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And at some point I would remember that I had told myself that I had resolved to pay attention to this anger, and I would be in a full-blown rage. And about all I could do at that point And again, I'd had very little training. I had read this book on Everyday Zen. I hadn't gone to any meditation classes. I didn't have any experience or training in paying attention to the body. But I knew that I was angry. I recognized it. So just that recognition, yep, I'm angry. Boy, I'm angry. That's about all I could do. It's like, what do I do with this? You know, what does it mean to be mindful of this? You know, and after some period of time of just like going, yep, angry. I just like, it's like, well, I guess I just go back to work, you know. So that's what I did. You know, I was often sitting at my desk when I, was doing this. I was a computer consultant volunteer in the Peace Corps. So I was often at the desk at a computer. So I would just go back to work. But over the course of months of doing this, I began to see that this resolve to wake up for the anger, it began to, it's like it woke me up earlier in the process of anger, so that instead of being in a full-blown rage, at the time that I became aware and remembered, I'm supposed to pay attention to this, it would be more of a normal anger. That was a little bit easier to tolerate than the full-blown rage. I could see, that the full-blown rage was way more challenging. And the normal anger is like, okay, yep, I can sit with this for a few minutes. But again, I didn't have the skills or the tools even of what it meant to bring the attention inwards. All I really was doing was recognizing I'm angry, simply recognizing it. And over the course of several months of this, I began waking up even earlier and earlier, so that it was more of an irritation than even an anger. And then one day, I was in my kitchen, and I was cutting an apple. And I saw a thought go through my mind about the person I was angry with. And we were at a fruit stand in the Sacramento River Delta. And I could see the connection between what I was doing, the cutting the apple, and the thought. And I could also see in that moment this momentum of the mind to jump on that thought and think more thoughts in order to get angry. I was not angry in that moment of the thought appearing. I could see the anger wasn't there yet. But I could feel this freight train of desire to get angry. I had spent a lot of time in the previous months paying attention to rage, to anger, and seeing how unpleasant it was. And in that moment of seeing, there's the thought, there's the momentum or the intention or the inclination towards anger. The mind, I didn't do any of this. This wasn't a conscious thing. This is really the process unfolding simply in a natural way. The mind realized it had a choice. It's like, go down that path where I'm going to experience suffering through the anger, or let it go. The mind said, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to let it go. It was kind of like what happens when the body touches a hot pot on the stove, and releases it even before you've actually even felt the heat. The mind just let it go because it knew if it held on to it or if it went that way, it would suffer. And in the next moment, and this all happened like that, this experience that I'm describing. The next moment, I stood there, and I waited to get angry. Because I had seen all of this. I had seen, I have a choice. I don't have to go down that road. But I didn't believe it. I thought that there was an intricate, linked connection between the thought of this person and the anger. And that there would be no way that thought could arise without the anger arising. So I stood there waiting to get angry, and I did not get angry. And I was completely blown away by the power of that mindfulness to insert itself into this process, this habit of mind. It's seen that habit of the mind wanting to get angry and saw how powerful the mindfulness was around that. That was the moment that I got hooked on this practice. That was it. I had really seen the power of mindfulness through this daily life observation of anger. Now, I'm not saying that I did not get angry again. In fact, I worked with anger with this person for years after that point. But I could see that this was the root. This was a way. This was a way out of the anger. That it had that capacity to take me beyond the anger. One of my teachers, Carol Wilson, says that when we're experiencing aversion and likewise anger, there's something unpleasant in our experience. And this comes back to that movement that aversion is a response to unpleasant. But often when we're experiencing aversion, we're not really aware of what the unpleasant thing is that we are reacting to. So it can help sometimes when we're experiencing aversion at the more subtle levels, that when we're angry, we usually know what we're angry about. Although sometimes I've seen myself, particularly on retreat, that I get into these aversive states of mind. I remember one time walking in the meditation, doing walking meditation, and I saw somebody's shoes sitting on the end of the walking path. And there was aversion to the shoes. It was like, why? But I could see that the mind was colored with aversion. That we get into these states where the mind is colored with aversion. For myself, I've seen this happen when I get really hungry. When I get really hungry, that everything is aversive. And finally, when I began to see that, I remember I was really hard to travel with, because there would be times when I would get so hungry that I would just turn into this raging person. And whenever I saw this happening, and when I went on a trip with somebody, I'd say, if I get into this state, just drive me to a restaurant, order some food, and make me eat it. Don't even give me a choice of what to eat. Just put some food in me. And what I began to see as I practiced with it is that I can just experience the physical unpleasant sensations. That the body gets into a very physically unpleasant experience. And for some reason, I used to become very reactive to that experience. And now I can pretty much just be with that experience and just know, yep, this is that state. And it doesn't tend to go into the lashing out at others. It stays with the unpleasantness and I don't end up reacting out towards others. So looking in our experience, what is the actual root? What is the source of the aversion? Is there something going on? When Carol tells this story, she talks about a man who was wearing a sweatshirt that was too tight, and that he was experiencing a lot of aversion, and he hadn't really noticed that his sweatshirt was too tight. But when he finally realized that, his physical body was actually uncomfortable because the sweatshirt was pulling his body in uncomfortable ways, and he took the sweatshirt off, the general state of aversion disappeared. So we can kind of miss what we are actually reacting to. So look in our experience. Look for what is unpleasant. It can be an interesting exploration. sometimes when we work with strong habits of mind, and this is true for any kind of strong habit of mind. Anger, it was for me. Self-hatred, it was for me. There tends to be these ruts in our mind, and if we get anywhere close to those ruts, it's almost impossible to avoid just dropping into them and experiencing the anger or the self-hatred, whatever that rut is. And at times, with very powerful states, or very powerful habits like that, it can be challenging to bring mindfulness to those states. Because what happens is that the state or the habit is stronger than the ability to be mindful of it. And I found this for myself around anger, the same anger that I talked about earlier, continued for years. And I began to get the tools and techniques for working with it with mindfulness, paying attention to the body. But I discovered that often as I would do this, that what would happen is I'd bring the mindfulness into it, and at some point I would lose the mindfulness and end up in the anger again. And so I began to see that the mindfulness wasn't quite strong enough to meet the anger. And I found that it was helpful to turn my attention, when I knew the anger was there, to turn my attention to something neutral in my experience. So what I would do, often I was walking when this anger would come over me. And I would notice the anger, I would recognize it, and it was almost like I'd speak to it for a moment. I'd say, yep, I see you, anger. And I also see that right now is not a good time to pay attention to you directly, because I'll just get caught. So I'm going to pay attention to my feet on the ground. And I also kind of made a bargain with it. I said, well, I'll bring my attention to you when my mindfulness gets stronger. So it was a way to put the anger aside without aversion. If we do this kind of taking our attention to something neutral in a way that's being aversive, I can't experience this anger because my mind isn't strong enough, and I'm no good because my mind isn't strong enough, then that will just feed the aversive habit. But if it's a simple putting aside, not now, and going to the neutral sensations, that can be a very powerful practice over years. And I did this for years, actually. And I, in a similar way to noticing in the early stages of my practice, noticing that the anger, I would break into the anger earlier and earlier in the cycle. What happened in this case is that I began noticing that the bouts of anger got further apart. That I would notice that I was angry, yep, not now. Pay attention to something neutral in my experience, just the sensations of my feet on the ground, my butt on the chair, and just stay there for a while, just bringing mindfulness to that neutral thing. That the bouts of anger got further and further apart. One day, I remember walking on the sidewalk leading to my house, and I realized that I hadn't been angry at this person in a very long time. And I thought, I wonder where it is, that anger. And even having him in my mind in that moment, I could not even generate the anger. And I thought, is it gone? And it's like, I kind of checked. And I couldn't find it at all. And it has never come back since that recognition. And in fact, what has replaced it has been a sense of kindness and care and concern for that person that I was so angry with. I never actually, that bargain that I made with my anger around this person, I'll pay attention to you when my mindfulness is stronger. I never had to do that. Just that recognition, yep, I'm angry. Put it aside, come to something neutral. that practice itself around anger was extremely powerful. And I'm not saying that I don't get angry at all. Not saying that. But that particular anger with that particular person is gone from my life. Completely eradicated. I cannot even summon it up anymore. I can remember that I was angry, but I cannot even summon it up. So this practice of bringing our mindfulness to our anger can be really powerful, not only to make our lives easier. I mean, it can lubricate our lives to begin to pay attention to this. But it's also a doorway into insight, into impermanence, into suffering, into the emptiness of experience. I found for myself that paying attention to these difficult states of mind has been a huge doorway towards those deeper insights. So it's not a lesser practice to pay attention to these things. It doesn't really matter what we pay attention to with mindfulness. Anything we bring our attention to with mindfulness, if that's what's happening in our experience, that's the right thing to be paying attention to. And that mindfulness can open the doorway to very deep, liberating insight. So I guess I talked the whole time. We maybe have a minute or two.
We've got a little more than that, so
okay.
I'd love to have some question time with you.
Okay, yeah.
I went to Civic Center yesterday with intending to be in the anti-war march. The energy of that march, in my opinion, was so angry, so anti-Israel, so anti-Condi Rice and anti-Bush, which I understand, but I caught the energy of it. There was couldn't march.
Yeah.
I just thought, this is whack. It's complicated, but the energy behind it was frightening.
Yes.
And I thought, it's whacked, This isn't a peace march.
Yeah.
It's just not. I understand the intent, and I'm sure there's individuals who are trying to be peaceful, but the energy of the march it just felt angry to me.
And it's wise, I think, to pay attention to that, and to know when you can engage with that kind of energy and when it's not skillful. If you can hold your ground and not get angry in that space, that can be skillful, to have that ability to spread a little bit of true peacefulness through that space. But it can be very challenging. So knowing when we can do that is really helpful. I remember in this whole exploration of anger around this person, one day seeing the wish that this person be harmed and realizing, it kind of exploded in my mind. It's like, this is the seed of war. And I could see that it's in me too. That movement is in me too, and this is where peace begins, in looking inward. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Your comment about that first moment of insight was the feeling of self-righteousness and how comfortable and I want more of this resonated with me. And I don't wonder if that is the I told you, my brother, the conservative. It's like I want to say, I told you so, and I haven't, because I know it isn't going to go anywhere. But boy, I can sure identify with the self-righteousness. And what do you do with that? I guess you be mindful of that.
Yes, be mindful of that. Absolutely. If we can be mindful of it, we can follow this middle road that the Buddha talked about, which is in strong emotions, neither to repress them nor to necessarily act on them. But when we are mindful of them, we can choose when to act on them and to be skillful in how we act on them. So it's not necessarily that we don't ever act on these things. I mean, that's, I think, a common misconception in Buddhist practice, that we only experience these things and let them flow out into the emptiness, and we never actually do anything. And that's a misconception. What I think of the practice as being is to pay attention so that we can act skillfully. Act not out of greed, aversion, and delusion, but out of wisdom and compassion instead. So if we are mindful of that self-righteousness, we can also see a seed, perhaps, of loving kindness underneath it, of a wish that everybody be happy. And if we can act from that place, it will be more skillful. So, there are layers and layers. And I believe actually that, I've seen in my own experience that all of my yucky habits stem from wanting to be happy, actually. My anger actually stems from wanting to be happy. And that wish for happiness is a wholesome wish. It just gets perverted and twisted into the unskillful reactions. So if we can hang out with mindfulness, we have a chance to uncover those more skillful underlying motivations. Do we have...
Yes.
More time? Okay.
I had an experience this week, which is, I think it talks to catching yourself, catching myself, that I want to share, and that is, I think this is a challenge for a lot of us, and that is road rage and driving, people cutting you off and not letting, and so I was, on my way to work, and there was a traffic jam, and me trying to get into my parking lot, and there was this, woman in a big Range Rover next to me, and I was like, straight in my lane, and she wanted to get into my lane, and I was just going straight ahead, and she got pissed off and, yelled at me something like, oh yeah, you're making like, a big dick with your car, you want to like blah blah, whatever it was. And I was like, why don't you, I was just about to say, why don't you go fuck yourself, but I said, why don't you, and I stopped, right, my window was open, hers was open, and I sort of caught myself and sort of just stopped it, why don't you? And I just went right back to driving. And of course there was somebody now 1 second later in front of me that wanted to get in, and I went, yeah, I'll show you. Okay, I'm a nice guy.
Doormat.
One thing I've found for myself in that is that I now kind of use driving as an opportunity to practice generosity. And, it's like, oh, I can cultivate generosity while I'm driving. Yes, please, go ahead. And take some delight in the fact that you're actually cultivating a skillful mind state. That for me, it was like a revelation that, oh, something as simple as letting somebody in front of me in the grocery line, or letting somebody in front of me merge easily on the freeway, that's an act of generosity and is something to take some joy in. Yes, please.
Yeah, but I think it's interesting that we're discussing anger, and which is really, I think a lot of people get caught up in at various times. And you see that when people talk about road rage, for instance, which is one of my biggest problems and continuing problems, where I exhibit rage and even put myself in grave danger at times because of that. It tends to, I don't see, the tendency is to laugh it off as something frivolous or something like that, when it's a very serious form of rage, projection, macho, feeling disrespected, some of the really serious kinds of feelings that people have, and some of the hardest things to deal with, and can really bring extreme, to myself, for instance, extreme irrationality and ragefulness, and it just gets carried away, and it's very hard to deal with. And the same thing with dealing with something like I mean, I deal with in terms of the war, for instance, I've gotten to the place where I deal, now that's, I think what people are feeling more and more with the war is impotent rage, impotent, that they're helpless. Mm-hmm. There's one thing in kind of putting it off and mindfulness and trying to push it away. But that doesn't change the reality on the ground, so to speak, And I think a lot of people are getting to the place, I dealt with the demonstration yesterday by not going, because I know that it's not, I've gotten to a place where it isn't going to do a fucking bit of good with those people over there in Washington. Basically it's going to play out for a long time. So, but to let go and to feel better myself, how does that deal with the reality, But a lot of my road rage has to do, which is, I think, my most difficult type. When I think of anger, I think of that a lot, because I do a lot of driving, is the fact that it's a lot of projection and macho-ness and all of that, feeling that somebody is going to get away with something, which is all a pile of, in a minute, it doesn't mean a goddamn thing.
Yeah, so you've touched on a lot of things. One of the things...
a lot of it is nebulous and difficult to do.
It's very difficult.
In a certain way, if I'm angry at a person, you can work it through in a certain period and let go of it. But some of these other things out there are less able to get a handle on.
Well, I think the way to get a handle on them is, again, by just paying attention, being mindful, because I found myself in exploring the anger through mindfulness that generally the anger through my experience has greatly diminished over time through this practice. And if you're in a situation where you know that anger is likely to happen, use that as practice. Get in the car, especially if you know you're going to be on the freeway during rush hour, and don't put your radio on, don't put music on, use it as a practice opportunity. And really just observe, when does it begin? How does it feel? Use that as a meditation environment to explore it. And if you do, it will definitely change through your experience, if you can explore it in that way. So I think we do have to stop now.
We will. And you're joining us for a cup of tea afterwards.
Yes.
So I think there was maybe one or two more questions maybe you can ask Andrea there. So, is anyone here for the first or second time or returning after a while? Relatively new? Well, welcome. We now have a little social half hour. You're welcome to stay and join us and meet a few people. And do we have any announcements? We have a host. Who's our host again?
That's me. I'm Cass. I'm your host today. And so please stay and enjoy the fellowship of the Sangha. There's tea and munchies. And if you have some tea, please wash your cup afterwards. There's a sign-up sheet if you'd like to fill in your name, email, or name. And it's right beside the Dana bowl. An opportunity for us to practice generosity and to help meet the commitments of the Sangha, financial commitments. We suggest a donation of $5 to $8 or whatever you're moved to contribute. And I think that's it.
Yeah, I just want to repeat an announcement I made last week. GBS does have a project where once a month we put on a dinner for the Larkin Street Youth Center. It's a center for homeless youth. And it's very well received. That they like us a lot for doing that. It's a really good energy. Anyway, I'm just asking you, if it's something you might be interested in, you can see me afterwards. I'll put your name on the volunteer list. It's not a commitment. If you can't do a certain month, I'm not going to nail you. But I think people sometimes get a little antsy about approaching me on that. But it is something that when you have the time and opportunity and desire, it's a fun project to get involved in. So see me afterwards if you're interested.
We got contacted this week by the director of the San Francisco Buddhist Center. Evidently last week someone went upstairs. It was not toxic, or they had a question about this open studio thing, and there are residents upstairs. Anyway, there's no reason for us to go upstairs. We just need to understand that there's no one upstairs that needs to be disturbed. The person don't quite trespass, so we just need to understand that there's nothing up there for us. I want to recommend there's a DVD with Robert Thurman. He gave 3 lectures at the Tibet House in New York on Buddhism, and it's fabulous. I also want to recommend that I'm in the Bay section of the San Francisco Choral Society, and we have a concert the weekend before Thanksgiving on the 17th and 18th. Saturday night, Sunday afternoon, there are 3 concert series in this time of war and rage on peace, and one of them is a newly commissioned piece by a local composer named Mark Winges, and it's called Pax Penetralis, about inner peace, with text by Rumi. And there's this very stirring, powerful anti-war piece by Vaughan Williams called Dona Nubis Pace, and an exquisite and sublime piece called Lux Aeterna by Lawrence Mousen. And I cannot describe it. Is like celestial lovemaking. It just keeps swooning and building, and it just is hair-raisingly uplifting and tenderizing and moving, and we're all afraid we're going to cry. Once I said, just keep repeating, I am a professional, which we're not. But anyway, it's going to be a great concert, and I hope you can come. I'm going to send out a list of announcements to that.
There's a movie called The Bible Tells Me So. I think it would be really interesting. It's about... Has anyone seen it?
No, I want to see it.
Yeah, it's about homosexuality, and it has interesting gems like the fact that when Leviticus mentions abomination, it just means not in line with our culture. So it's quite a good movie from what I've heard when you reviews. It's on tonight. Thanks.
I just wanted to mention that the Mindfulness, Diversity, and Social Change Sangha was started about 10 years ago in response to a retreat, which is a Tibetan Sangha that's been practicing for 10 years, is having a half-day retreat next Sunday for people of color. So if anyone knows folks who are people of color who are interested in that, you're more than welcome to join the Mindfulness, Diversity, Social Change half-day retreat. And that will be in Oakland. That'll be next Sunday, actually between 9 and 12. So the Sangha meets regularly on Monday nights from 7 to 9 in the East Bay, and is open to all folks. So.
See someone else? Okay, next week is a perennial favourite of ours, Donald Rothberg, who, if you haven't heard him speak before, is really into socially engaged spirituality and Buddhism, and was a long-time teacher and organizer for the Buddhist Peace Fellowship. Now runs the brand new Path of Engagement 2-year socially engaged spirituality program at Spirit Rock. He's a good speaker. Okay, let's get in the circle for dedication.
May the benefits of our practice together be offered to support the welfare and liberation of all beings everywhere. May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be safe. May all beings live with ease. May all beings be free from suffering.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.